The national telethon United News continues. You are watching 1+1 TV channel. In the studio are Marichka Podalko and I, Ruslan Sheripov. Our guest is already here, Ihor Chalenko, head of the Center for Analysis and Strategies. We will be talking about international news. Mr. Ihor, welcome to the studio. Good morning. The European Union, or more precisely the European Commission together with Belgium, will meet on Friday to discuss the future of those 140 billion in Russian assets that are frozen in Belgium. Thank you. Belgium initially said a categorical no to using this money for Ukraine's benefit, whether it be discussions about reparations or a loan for Ukraine. Well, now apparently a meeting will take place and they will look for some kind of format. What does this mean? How should we interpret this news? And is it really possible that this money could go toward this reparations loan for Ukraine?
First of all, we need to understand that the topic of a reparations loan, even a reparations credit, is still an element of stable financing for Ukraine over the next few years. In other words, this is a demonstration to Putin that financially Ukraine will definitely not be left without support. And when Belgium essentially put this issue on hold until December, in my opinion, it was a certain window of opportunity for Putin to stop the war now. We do not see any such signals. Therefore, in fact, Belgium now obviously already has, through behind-the-scenes negotiations, certain signals that there really will be a distribution of responsibility among all EU countries regarding the organization of this reparations loan. Belgium does not want to be at the forefront alone if, for example, the Russian Federation decides to file lawsuits and so on regarding this issue. Therefore, I think that after all, we will see progress on this issue. The only thing is, additional efforts are still being made right now. Look, there is a signal from the IMF that there may be issues with the 8 billion in the next program if there is no decision on the reparations loan. So this is already a very serious trigger specifically for launching further financial assistance for our country. Therefore, I think that now, in the second half of November and in December, the necessary decisions will indeed be made. And
tell me, please, we always perceive Belgium more as a location where European institutions are situated. And what is Belgium's actual role in these decisions? Not just as the host of European institutions, as a sort of symbolic capital of Europe, but as a country? What does Belgium actually decide?
In this case, it's not simply that the Euroclear depository is physically located on its territory, and that accordingly, the largest amount of immobilized Russian assets is under its jurisdiction. By the way, I'd like to remind you that Belgium was actually one of the first countries to provide us not only with the profits from, so to speak, the financing, specifically from the profits of immobilized Russian assets, but Belgium also gave us the taxes paid on these funds. In other words, they redirected them directly from the needs of Belgians to the needs of Ukraine. And in fact, it demonstrated that in principle it stands firm, absolutely on the side of Ukraine. The issue lies solely in the legal domain. And in order to preserve the stability of the Eurozone and the reputation of the Eurozone as the largest stable financial area in the world.
Even just before our broadcast, there was news on the television news service that drones had started circling over Belgium. And this is not the first time they have appeared there. At first, it seems, the Belgian Minister of Defense stated that these unidentified drones were monitoring the bases where F-16 aircraft are stationed. Then it turned out that there is actually a facility in Belgium where nuclear forces are located with American military personnel, and these drones were also spotted there. In your opinion, did this play any role in the fact that the Belgians somewhat, from their categorical no, shifted to seeking a compromise regarding Russian assets? Or perhaps, on the contrary, Russia wants to intimidate the Belgians in this way? As if to say, look, our drones can paralyze your airspace, so don't touch our money.
I think rather it's the second scenario here, meaning this is a direct provocation from the Russian aggressor, but in fact it could have the opposite effect, leading to a more positive attitude from the Belgian authorities. On the topic of that same reparations loan, because it's really not just about the financial capital in this case, but also about the location of many military facilities and defense industry production sites. Well, for example, the Thales missiles, which are now also being supplied to us to shoot down Shaheds, they too, accordingly, have their industrial base specifically in Belgium. And as soon as the news appeared that these 70mm missiles were being supplied to us for some reason, it was precisely over this production site that we saw Russian Shaheds. Well, those aren't Shaheds, those are some other drones, so there could be other types of Garans as well. But nonetheless, Russia, in fact, by its own actions, is now accelerating further coordination around Ukraine.
Mr. Ihor, we would like to transition our conversation to America through this morning's news. This is the election of the new mayor of New York. I think you'll agree with me that, to put it briefly, in terms of his political stance, he's an anti-Trumpist, right?
Essentially, he's an anti-Trumpist. Of course, he supports the trends that are generally present today in the US Democratic Party. It's clear that New York itself is a city of immigrants. We know its history and its unique ethnic makeup very well. But I think that this recent victory is a very serious signal, specifically for the Democratic Party. Well, after all, it's time to raise their heads a bit in the upcoming confrontation regarding the midterm elections. The only thing I would note is that the previous mayor, also a representative of the Democratic Party, Mr. Adams, won the 2022 election by an even larger margin. So right now, this is a continuation of the trend where the Democratic Party truly holds power, specifically in New York. I think that most likely Trump, based on the current results, of course, we understand there will be certain disagreements, disputes with the new city head, but most likely this will still become a reason to initiate the cancellation of early voting. That is everything related to mail-in voting and so on. We know that this initiative is being pushed forward and
responsible
in America. This is directly at the federal level, meaning they want to push this through Congress. And we remember that in Congress we have, and the majority of Republicans in both the lower and upper chambers.
Mr. Ihor Chalenko, continuing the topic of the United States of America, today journalists noted in American publications that this shutdown, which has been ongoing in the United States for 35 days now, we remind you this is a forced pause in the work of the federal government because Congress has not approved an additional budget, and as a result, the work of some government agencies is somewhat paralyzed. This shutdown is the largest in US history. It has even already surpassed the shutdown that was tomorrow.
Surpass tomorrow.
It will surpass it tomorrow? Right now, it has equaled the shutdown that happened during Trump's first term. Well, and if this continues, it will have some impact on our relations with the Americans in terms of arms supplies and the fulfillment of existing contracts.
We are being given signals that there won't be any problems. There is communication going on, but we understand that in such a suspended state, the entire bureaucratic machine of the United States is still affected, and this influences absolutely all processes. Although, when it comes specifically to defense, there is a separate budget, the US defense budget. For the next budget period, it amounts to over $892 billion. And by the way, our funding under the USAA program was gradually increased there, depending on the reading. USAA. If in previous years we had $300 million under that line item, in the first reading it was about $400 million, and now they've raised it, it's already $500 million under this line item. So in principle, as far as further communication is concerned, there won't be any problems. But we also have to understand that there is already the issue of paying military personnel. And Mr. Besant speaks about this directly. So overall, this is a real problem for the United States. And to say that it will not affect our relations at all, we can't say that because it's a bureaucratic machine and there are certain nuances. We remember how the refusal from USAID, at the beginning of the year, how it affected a number of processes in our bilateral community.
That's exactly why I'm asking. You correctly pointed out that this shutdown also affects military salaries because there was news about 2 or 3 weeks ago that one of Trump's friends, a billionaire, anonymously, journalists uncovered this later, deposited $130 million into the Pentagon's accounts so that the Pentagon could pay the military during that shutdown, which lasted 20 days at the time and has now exceeded 35 days. That's why we're clarifying with you. Continuing on this topic, today in the New York Times there was an article about how the US, this is no longer a secret, it's talked about a lot and often, has been developing several military scenarios regarding an invasion of Venezuela. And if any of these scenarios actually happens, how will it affect prices, primarily oil prices? Will this price go up or will it go down? What interests us most is our own context. Will there be less Russian oil then? Or will there be more of it if, for example, military actions suddenly begin in Venezuela?
First of all, we have to remember that 90% of Venezuela's oil exports go to meet China's needs. Accordingly, if there are problems in this direction and contracts are disrupted, China will obviously buy more Russian oil. Although, again, as we understand, there are different grades of oil, and accordingly, it's not that easy. Retooling specific refineries is also an issue, nevertheless. Most likely, the current situation with Venezuela is still just one of the elements in the negotiation track between the US and China. I still don't expect a complete overthrow of the Maduro regime. Most likely, there will be targeted strikes on specific logistical infrastructure sites that are currently being identified as used by drug cartels. In this way, the United States will demonstrate its strength, but in the negotiation track, it will defend certain positions against China. However, look at this year's Nobel Peace Prize winner, Ms. Machado, and she gave Trump a pass, indicating that further escalation and the removal of the Maduro regime is exactly what Venezuela needs.
And what does Ukraine need in this context?
For us, we also need to understand the Maduro regime. Today, it is directly a partner of the Russian Federation, and if there is increased activity there, the Russian Federation will have to redirect some of its resources to that front.
And what about transport planes?
Transport planes, Wagner, and not only them. They say that even drones are already being transferred. So some work has already started there, and this directly disperses the efforts of the Russians. Tactically, this looks good for us. But at the same time, we have to understand that generally speaking, when it comes to the price of oil, any such turbulence actually leads to an increase in the price of both Brent and WTI and so on. Therefore, the strategy here should be to increase the overall global supply of oil while simultaneously reducing the supply coming from the Russian Federation.
Regarding Russia, yesterday Putin gave a speech, and among the main points he announced were that Russia is starting serial production of the Oreshnik, as well as that there will be hypersonic missiles with nuclear warheads. And interestingly, he summed it all up by saying that Moscow poses no threat to anyone. What is your opinion? In general, how do you interpret these statements, and who were they aimed at?
Well, they are aimed both at the domestic audience to demonstrate the strength of the Russian Federation and, of course, at the outside world. In other words, it's a continuation of saber rattling. Although I would like to point out that they are just starting to produce the Sarmat missile, and supposedly they have the capacity to manufacture up to 6 missiles per year, Ukraine was the first to impose sanctions on 25 enterprises directly involved in the production cycle of this Sarmat missile. And let's not forget the recent great news that one of the Sarmat missiles over Kapustin Yar was destroyed, thanks to the joint efforts of the Ukrainian special services, the defense forces as a whole, including the SBU, the GUR, the SSO, and everyone involved. So, this just shows that attempts to play with the Sarmat missile topic, including in the Belarusian context, could actually pose a problem for the Russian Federation as a whole, because there is no such thing as an indestructible weapon. And accordingly, the more they try to play these games, the more failures they might encounter.
Mr. Ihor, notice that we are not discussing the topic of negotiations with you. It has become irrelevant in recent weeks. In your opinion, what could bring it back into the public discourse?
Certain signals that may still be coming from the Russian side, because, of course, behind the scenes we sense that some communication is taking place. And the same proposal from Mr. Slab, who suggested, let's hold a meeting in Johannesburg. Theoretically, between Zelensky and Putin, and immediately after that, the Russian Federation announces the composition of its delegation, headed by the deputy head of Putin's administration, and makes it clear that he himself will not attend. This precisely indicates that negotiations are ongoing, but so far they have not yielded any results. And this precisely shows that it is necessary to increase pressure specifically on Russia, so that the Turkish direction, specifically the Istanbul format, and the issue of a bilateral or trilateral meeting would still move forward. Ukraine is doing everything possible for this.
Mr. Ihor, thank you very much. Ihor Chalenko, head of the Center for Analysis and Strategy, was a guest in our studio.